It is the evening of February 21st, 1945, just off the black sands of Iwo Jima. Aboard the escort carrier USS Bismarck C, the crew has barely caught their breath after another cycle of flight operations. At 17:30, radar shows incoming contacts. The order goes out, launch the fighters. Engines roar as aircraft claw into the air, only for the bogies to be identified as friendly. Planes are recalled, and the deck crews hurriedly make space. A handful of visiting aircraft are brought aboard, forcing several Wildcats down into the hangar still brimming with fuel. From the bridge, Captain John L. Pratt surveys his ship. Unbeknownst to him, out of the north, squadrons of Japanese bombers and torpedo planes are already on their way. They belong to a new breed of special attack units, and their mission is simple: crash into American ships and destroy them. By the beginning of 1945, the war in the Pacific had become a contest of endurance that Japan was ill-equipped to sustain. The American fleet, replenished by an industrial base that seemed inexhaustible, pressed forward island by island, each step bringing it closer to the Japanese homeland. The Japanese Navy, once the pride of the empire, had already been reduced to a shadow of its former self. The defeats at Midway, in the Solomons, and most decisively in the Philippine Sea and at Leyte Gulf, had left the Imperial Navy without an effective carrier arm. Where once Japan had counted on a decisive fleet battle to destroy American power in a single stroke, now it faced the slow but relentless erosion of its remaining strength. Against the armada of Essex-class fleet carriers and their escorting battleships, cruisers and destroyers, there was little hope of prevailing by conventional means. By late 1944, Japan had turned to organized suicide attacks as a way to offset American superiority at sea. Conventional raids were cut down by dense anti-aircraft fire, but a pilot who did not plan to return could often reach his target. What began with small groups of volunteers soon expanded into entire units trained for such missions, drawing on years of indoctrination that emphasized sacrifice and loyalty to the emperor. By the time of Iwo Jima, the kamikaze was no longer an experiment, but a standing tactic of Japanese air power. The Americans understood that they were confronting not only a tactical problem, but also a cultural one. Reports from the Philippines and Lingayen Gulf revealed how determined the kamikazes could be, and how difficult it was to defend against them. Ships bristled with guns, radar pickets were placed far out from the main fleet, and combat air patrols were expanded, but attackers still managed to slip through. The loss of vessels such as the destroyer Colhoun and damage to larger ships underlined that no warship was immune. The prospect of mass suicide attacks became even larger as the fleet advanced toward islands within easy range of the Japanese homeland. Into this environment came the campaign for Iwo Jima. Strategically, the island was invaluable. Situated halfway between Saipan and Tokyo, it offered a base for long-range fighters to escort B-29 raids and a safe haven for crippled bombers returning from missions over the home islands. American planners knew that many aircraft and crews had been lost after bombing Japan simply because they could not reach their bases in the Marianas on the return leg. By seizing Iwo Jima, they would gain a forward airfield and deprive the Japanese of a base from which they could intercept American bombers. For Japan, the island was both a shield and a symbol, defended by a garrison that had transformed its volcanic rock into a maze of bunkers, tunnels, and artillery. For the Americans, its capture was worth the cost, no matter how heavy. The fleet that assembled to support the landings was immense. Under Admiral Spruance's Fifth Fleet and Admiral Mitchell's Task Force 58, the Americans deployed a vast array of fleet and escort carriers, battleships, cruisers, destroyers, and auxiliaries. The escort carriers, though smaller and less glamorous than the great Essex-class ships, were indispensable. They provided the close air support that the Marines depended on as they stormed the beaches, maintained around-the-clock combat air patrol against Japanese raids, and ferried replacement aircraft and supplies. Without them, the assault could not have been sustained. USS Bismarck C, a Casablanca-class escort carrier, was one of these workhorses. The Casablanca class was designed for speed of construction above all else. Built in enormous numbers in American shipyards, they allowed the Navy to replace losses quickly, and to provide carriers for every amphibious operation. But their very design imposed limits. With a length of just over 500 feet and a displacement of around 10,000 tons, they carried smaller air groups than the fleet carriers. Their flight decks were unarmored, their hangars enclosed, and their defensive armament lighter. They were never intended to stand in the line of battle against determined attack. Rather, they were meant to provide numbers and flexibility. When hit, they could not absorb punishment as the fleet carriers sometimes could. Fires spread rapidly in their confined hangars, and damage control crews had to fight with limited equipment and little margin for error. Commissioned only in May 1944, Bismarck C was a new ship, commanded by Captain John L. Pratt. Her complement of Wildcats and Avengers could perform both air defense and ground support missions. By February 1945, she had been assigned to Rear Admiral C.T. Durgin's support group, alongside Makin Island, Lunga Point, Saginaw Bay, Rudyard Bay, and Anzio. These carriers operated close to the beaches, launching a constant stream of aircraft to attack Japanese positions and defend the invasion fleet. The Japanese High Command, aware of the importance of these escort carriers, resolved to strike them directly. On February 21st, Vice Admiral Kimpei Teraoka's Mitate unit of the 601st Air Group set out from Katori Naval Air Base west of Yokohama. Comprising 12 fighters, 12 carrier bombers, and 8 torpedo bombers, the group refueled at Iwo before heading south toward Iwo Jima. Their orders were clear: locate and destroy American carriers supporting the invasion. The timing was significant. For 2 days, the Marines had struggled to expand their beachhead on Iwo Jima under intense fire from Japanese defenses. Naval gunfire and airstrikes were critical in suppressing enemy positions. If the escort carriers could be neutralized, the Marines' advance would slow, and Japanese defenders might gain precious time. For the Japanese pilots, many of whom had already written farewell letters, the sortie represented both a personal sacrifice and a contribution to the defense of their nation. By the evening of the 21st of February, the skies over Iwo Jima were alive with reports of incoming aircraft. For the carriers supporting the invasion, the most dangerous hours were about to begin. The light was fading quickly as the escort carriers of Rear Admiral C.T. Durgin's support group steamed east of Iwo Jima. USS Bismarck C, only recently recovered from her latest flight operations, was ordered at 17:30 to put her aircraft aloft again to intercept radar bogies. The contacts proved to be friendly, and the ship recalled her planes. With her own deck busy, 3 additional aircraft from other carriers were waved aboard, forcing 4 of Bismarck C's Wildcats below into the hangar still fully fueled. While Durgin's escort carriers worked close east of the beaches, the fleet carrier Saratoga had been detached to the southwest, operating separately to provide night fighter cover for the invasion force. At about 17 o'clock, she became the first major target of Mitate unit's coordinated strike. The attackers came in low and fast, their approach masked by the failing light. One crashed through her starboard side, exploding on the hangar deck and setting off raging fires. A second suicide plane struck soon after, tearing up her flight deck and wrecking parked aircraft. Over the next 90 minutes, more attackers hurled themselves at her, and by 1846, she had been hit 5 times in all. Flames shot skyward, heavy explosions reverberated through her hull, and fires burned uncontrollably in the hangar and amidships compartments. Hundreds of sailors fought to contain the inferno, some dragging hoses across molten steel, others carrying the wounded out through smoke-filled passages. By the time the last kamikaze was destroyed, Saratoga had suffered 143 dead and 202 wounded. Yet the damage control effort was successful. Despite the chaos, she was able to resume limited flight operations by 2031 and departed an hour later for Eniwetok, crippled but afloat. Even as Saratoga reeled under these blows to the southwest, the same wave of Mitate's aircraft was sweeping eastward toward Durgin's escort carriers off Iwo Jima, where Bismarck C and Lunga Point now braced for their share of the assault. At 1845, the first enemy planes appeared through the dusk above the escort carriers. In the fading light, it was hard to distinguish shapes, until a twin-engined Mitsubishi G4M Betty bomber was spotted running low at Lunga Point. Bismarck C's gunners tracked it, their tracers cutting into the bomber's fuselage until it plunged into the sea in flames. No sooner had cheers gone up than 5 Nakajima B-6N Jill torpedo bombers were seen approaching from the northeast. Fighters from Lunga Point were aloft on combat air patrol, but the attackers pressed through toward the escort carriers. Bismarck C and a destroyer joined Lunga Point in opening fire. One torpedo crossed close under Lunga Point's bow before its aircraft was shot down and crashed into the sea 200 yards off her port side. A second attacker escaped destruction and disappeared into the gloom. A third was hit repeatedly, its torpedo passing astern of Lunga Point before flames engulfed it. With its final momentum, the Jill slammed into the sea beside the carrier, an explosion rattling her hull and wounding 11 men. A fourth attacker disintegrated under concentrated fire, while a fifth veered away, leaving the American ships momentarily reprieved. Even as Lunga Point fought for survival, another plane closed on Bismarck C herself. Lookouts tracked it from 1,000 yards out, gunners scoring hits, but the attacker's approach was too low for the carrier's guns to depress. The plane roared in unimpeded and struck a beam of the after elevator. On impact, it tore loose 4 torpedoes from their racks, scattering them across the hangar deck. Elevator cables were severed, dropping the platform to the hangar below. The afterfire main was destroyed, crippling the ship's firefighting capacity. Conflagration stations activated sprinklers and water curtains, but no water flowed aft. Flames spread among the fueled aircraft. Damage control teams responded swiftly, attacking the blaze with hoses, portable extinguishers, and sand. For a moment, it seemed the fires might be contained. Then, scarcely 2 minutes after the first crash, disaster struck again. A second kamikaze, unseen until the last seconds, slammed through the flight deck forward of the first impact and exploded among the parked fighters, which were still fully fueled. Witnesses recalled an instant blinding flash and a shock that tore through the hangar deck. Firefighters at the scene were wiped out by the blast, leaving the flames to grow unchecked. The detonation blew out the rear of the hangar, crumpled gallery deck bulkheads, and ruptured overhead compartments. Ammunition began to cook off, spewing fragments and rendering the aft compartments untenable. Captain John L. Pratt assessed the damage from the bridge and realized his ship was mortally stricken. At 19:05, with flames consuming the entire aft section, he gave the order to abandon ship. Before this, life rafts and floater nets had already been launched, though many crewmen would still be forced to jump without gear as explosions blocked access points. Crewmen scrambled to life rafts, Carly floats, or simply leapt into the dark sea. The rolling swells made launching boats hazardous. Destroyers and escorts edged in as close as they dared to pick up survivors, but their progress was slowed by the sea state and the continuing air threat. To make matters worse, Japanese aircraft strafed the men in the water, forcing rescuers to break off or maneuver sharply. Amid the chaos, explosions continued to rip through the carrier. Pratt remained aboard until about 20 o'clock, supervising evacuation before finally leaving the bridge himself. Not long after, at around 2013, a colossal blast rocked the ship, likely the torpedoes stored aft cooking off. The explosion blew away the stern and hurled men into the sea. Bismarck C heeled sharply to starboard, rolled over, and within an hour, she was gone. Casualty lists compiled afterward recorded 119 dead and 99 wounded. Rescue ships worked through the night in heavy seas and under the threat of further air attack. The destroyer escort Edmonds alone rescued 370 survivors, while other destroyers and escorts brought aboard hundreds more. Meanwhile, other ships in the invasion area had also been hit. LST-477 was struck by a crash-diving fighter that killed 9 and wounded 5 more, its store of ammunition exploding during the blaze. LST-809 narrowly avoided a similar fate when gunners destroyed an attacker at close range. Within less than 2 hours of the first strike, Bismarck C had been consumed by fire, blasted apart, and sunk. The night that Bismarck C went down was only the 4th day of the Iwo Jima campaign. Offshore, the carriers and their escorts would remain on station for weeks, flying sorties and enduring more raids. On the island itself, the battle was far from decided. The Marines were still struggling through the volcanic terrain and would continue to do so in what became one of the bloodiest battles of the Pacific War. For Japan, the February attacks showed that organized suicide units could still break through and damage major ships, even as their air power was worn thin. For the United States, the destruction of an escort carrier and the crippling of a fleet carrier in a single evening confirmed that the kamikaze had become a standing threat. Bismarck C was the last American carrier to be lost in World War II, but her end did not close the story of the kamikaze. It was a sign of what awaited the fleet as it drew closer to the Japanese home islands. Thank you for watching this video. Please leave a like. It really helps out the channel. If there is a topic, battle, or person you would like to know more about, let me know your thoughts in a comment. I would also like to thank all my patrons and channel members for their generous support. If you enjoy House of History and you want to support my work, consider joining me on Patreon. For just $1 per month, you will gain early access to all my videos without any in-video advertisements. Don't forget to subscribe. See you next time.